Thank you, Fiona. I'm going to start off by acknowledging the original custodians of these lands and pay my respect to elders past and present. I tend to go further in my keynotes in expressing my gratitude to the ancestors of these lands and my ancestors, because I truly believe without them I wouldn't have the courage or the audacity to do the work I do. Because the last thing I ever thought I'd be doing is standing on stage and speaking about some of the things I do, and so I usually need to say that to ground myself. I also want to acknowledge you for being here. You know, I came in earlier and heard Reese and Ryan and Madison, and I know that you have choice. There are choices of where you can be, so it's never lost on me when people come through, and I know this is property management, and you might have different challenges and wants, but I want to let you know I see you and thank you for that. Okay, so before I go any further, I need to talk to you about my small print. Now, usually you have a contract and you've got small print that tends to be at the back. I like to bring my small print to the front because I really want to know, I want you to know who I am from the get-go. So small print number 1. I have a potty mouth. I actually curse like a sailor, but I'm not going to do that here because I do want to be invited back one day. But in all honesty, every now and again, a word will drop. And I usually have to put this up because I really do appreciate it's not everyone's language of choice. I do not say it to be disrespectful. I'm definitely not disrespectful. However, I have to ask for your forgiveness in advance, and this is the reason why I say it. Contrary to belief, I'm actually quite intelligent, first-class engineering degree at Brunel University, so I just wanted to put that out there. But usually it's because I can't find any other word to make the message come through. The other thing is, sometimes I get really excited about my content that I start to speak really fast. And if I hear everybody that I've heard speak today, especially lastly Fiona just speaking, I like to pause. I like to pause to take a breath. I no longer subscribe to the need to be perfect, whether I'm on stage or not. And I'm okay to stop and pause on stage. I create spaces to make that okay. I invite you to hold the space for me as well. Because when I pause, most of the time I'm having what I call a download. A download is a message that is coming through to me that has nothing to do with my content. And I'm having this internal battle as to why I'm having this need to share a particular story. But what happens after I do a keynote is someone comes up to me and says, you know that story you shared? That felt like you were speaking to me. So I'm usually just trying to honor that. But here's the thing I need you to try and hold on to out of everything I'm going to say over the next 30-something minutes. You will have your own downloads. You have probably already had so many in the thousands. Downloads are messages for you, by you. I'm acutely aware that I am not directly in the real estate or property management world. At some point, I have been a property manager. At some point, I've probably been impacted by the work you do. But at the end of the day, most of us that are speaking here are nothing but vessels. We are sharing certain perspectives, possibly research, our life experience. You know what you need. You know what you hear from me that will be relevant to you. So I know you've been given a book, but I want to invite you, if you want to completely go off into whatever world you want to go into as I speak. Let's get used to listening to our guts, to that instinct that has a message for us. It doesn't have to do with my content, but I want to invite you to honor it. Because as much as I stand here and I know that I'm good at what I do, I still have nerves, imposter syndrome still comes to visit me, I know that I'm not going to be able to be in your shoes. I haven't had your experience. So please listen to your downloads. The last 2, small print. I do talk about the elephant in the room, meaning I will say things that typically we think people should only think and not say. May have said it earlier, I do not subscribe purely to surface conversations alone. I'm okay talking about the weather. I'm okay talking about the coffee, but I think most of us have invested in time and money to be here because we want some form of radical change. And I think to do that, we need to talk about the things that usually maybe we don't, part of the connecting you have with people. I just ask we do it with kindness and compassion, something we heard again today from Reese. Last one is very linked. I promise you the small print is really important because then you get to hear all my shit in really good one go. So this last one is about grace. I ask for your grace. Grace that as much as I am learning, I am unlearning a lot. Meaning I may still use language that appears to be exclusive, but that is not my intent. Grace is the fact that you can just trust that someone's intent is not to harm, but to actually learn. And so I'm definitely going to hang around. I'd love to know more about your world. But for you to be able to come up to me and say, actually, this is a different way that we might refer to certain things. And I tend to do this in my keynotes because it's something I want to try and have us do a lot more, to have a lot more grace. Because I think sometimes the way we're going, we will have a tendency to cancel the whole human race if we do not even just pause and assume that we do not have ill intent. Okay. So that's my small print. I'm going to try not to fuck it up, so let's see how we go. I just needed to get it out of the system. Please, forgive me, forgive me. All right, so before I go any further, I want to do a check-in. Like I said, I'm not in your industry. However, I am about the sustainability of humanity and how we show up. I want to know how you are. And when I say that, I mean go in any field you want. If you want to share what you came here for today, what your intentions are, how you're feeling, if you had the opportunity to be on stage and share something, what would you say? I just want to get insight because as I share my content, I want to see if I can touch on some of those things. I know my intentions for you speaking here is actually offering you an alternative perspective of how to be rebelliously curious, and I'll share a bit more about what that is. I think there's already something in your story for today and being curious about what else you could learn, what you don't know. But if we just put the slide up, sorry, I am being rebellious already by going to menti.com and not Slido. If you could just go onto menti.com and put that code in, and I want you to just write, I think you've got about 250 characters. I'm just keen to know where you are, so how you're feeling, what you've actually come to this conference for, anything you want to share, should you be given the platform, and this is the platform. We'll just leave that for a few seconds, and then we'll pull up the comments that are coming up. And no worries, I know some people don't want technology, so by all means, don't feel like you need to do this either. Okay. So if I could just ask for us to go to the mentimeter.com, and it will be there as well. So the code's at the top if you haven't done it. FYI, as you know, this is completely anonymous. Don't know who you are. If you can be a little bit kind and compassionate, but say exactly how you feel. Let's just know what's going on. What are we laughing at? What have I not seen? Can we turn the heat up? You see, this is another reason why I like putting this up. Sorry, I know I didn't ask for this, Thane. Is it possible? Thank you for scrolling. Beautiful. Okay. Okay, you've got this. Okay, someone's chatting to me. What? Someone read out to me. What have I seen there? Tired but ready to learn. Okay, I appreciate your honesty. Okay, broaden your understanding. It's so cold in here. Yes. I hear you. Someone probably thinks it's hot. To be inspired to do better. Being dragged down in the doing, want more of the being. Want to bring my team on the journey. Refreshment, okay? Courage. So when I asked, I was trying to get feedback for how to make sure my content was as relevant as possible, and I know time poor was a big thing. I know, we've potentially said every year since 2020 there's been challenges, and I know especially with the cost of living going up and this tension that seems to be had between, for want of a better word, landlords or property managers and tenants. Once again, I don't fully understand your world, but from an empathy perspective, that's where I'm hoping I can connect with you. So even if I'm not able to touch on everything that resonates, I want to invite you again to be the person who listens to the messages you need. Okay, thank you. If we go back to the slides, appreciate it. So I guess I wanted to see and hear you. And now what I want to do is share very quickly parts of my story. And this does irk me every time I need to do it, because I have a belief that says every time you tell your story, you're full of yourself. No one wants to hear your story. Yet the consistent theme I think I've had from every speaker I've heard so far, there's an element of their story. It's part of our connecting wherever you are in business, as a property manager or real estate. So when I share my story with you, I have no issue with you leaning into my story. I have no issue with you seeing it as something of interest. But I invite you to think of your own story. I invite you to think of the story you are telling yourself, the story you want to tell. And if for some reason you're not even interested in your story, I want you to maybe think of the story of the people you serve, the people you work with, the people you work for. And so that's the invitation I give to you. And every now and again, I will interrupt your thoughts by bringing you back into connecting with your story. Before I tapped into my concept of rebellious curiosity, I want to share some things that were coming up for me in life. I put this picture up. My children are much older than that now, but I'm a mum to 2 children, and that was when I was married. I love that picture. It shows happy moments, and I talk about this memo, the memo that we are born into a well-adjusted family. Usually a mum and a dad is the story that we've been depicted. You have a great education, you go to one of the best schools, you get a job, hopefully you fall in love, you get married, 2.4 kids, white picket fence, great job or career, try to get 1, maybe 2 holidays a year, work till you retire and you pass the baton on to your kids. I truly tried to follow that memo. And when I failed miserably through divorce and becoming a single parent to 2 children, it started to attack my very identity to the point that I was not showing up as well as I now know I can show up. I go straight into personal because what has always confused me, not just in my career, but in my business ventures, is this idea that we can separate our personal from our business. And I appreciate that has been the narrative and the blueprint for a very long time. I actually think it must be exhausting to try to be 2 different people. So I bring the personal in very quickly because I'll share when I started to get very curious and rebellious was actually in looking at some of the personal stuff, how that was impacting a lot of my business decisions. For me, this is why I ran to Australia. I'm this brown-eyed girl from South London, Brixton. On paper, I have no business being in Australia, definitely not on the Gold Coast. And so I started to build into a narrative that things could not be a certain way. I don't want to say I sat in a victim story for too long, but sometimes I was holding on to it. I was holding on to this narrative that, firstly, I needed to be part of a 2-parent household in order to have the money to come in. I wasn't able to get really creative because of the things I felt I was failing at. What made it worse for me was the story of having 2 children with 2 different dads. Once again, and I'll talk about sometimes how our beliefs are built, it was the narrative I was given, and if I felt I could not even hold it down in my household, it was affecting everything I was doing in my business. So that's relationships. My money story was another really big thing that I've had to get very curious about. I feel like I need to share this one now. I had grown up with the money story that there shouldn't be any money left at the end of the month. So when I started to open my businesses, especially my consultancy here in Australia, and I was winning million-dollar contracts with government, once again, this is not what I went to careers education for to say what to do. But when I started making more money, what this chick would do was make sure there was no money at the end of the month by creating bills. I was making shit up because for me, it made no sense that there was money in the account. Now, I've said that really quickly, but it's taken years and work of curiosity, personal investment to understand that the way I was running my business was based on a money story that did not believe I could ever earn more. It was changing how I was operating. So I just needed to put that one in there. The other story I've had to get really curious about was my career. You know, when Fiona was doing part of my bio and she said all these things, on paper it just sounds like I do so many different things. She mentioned I'm an engineer by profession. That's what brought me over to Australia. That is Martin Place Station in Sydney. Was the fact that I was actually interested in more than one thing. I have no issue with the memo of being in a particular field for as long or till you retire. But I actually also knew there was a part of my brain that really craved the creativity. And when people got really confused as to what I did, they made it more troublesome for them to try to connect with me. And so I started to focus on the how. And the how for me is where Rebellious Curiosity came through, and I'll share that shortly. This bit, it's only taken recent weeks where I've started to bring it in. This picture for me symbolizes my journey into looking and getting curious about my trauma. Now, once again, people might think, well, what's that got to do with the work I do? I had a belief that I was shy. I'm not shy. I can stand in front of you as long as I'm really congruent with my own version of truth and what I want to do, I'm okay. I'm an introvert, meaning that I don't necessarily feel the need to have this big conversation with groups all at once. I like that one-to-one connection, but I'm not shy. My shyness, or my thinking I was shy, once again, was driving the narrative and how I was meant to do business. And I'll share shortly, especially when I open my gym. For me, it had to start with childhood trauma, and a big reason why I'm doing research in that now, so currently doing a PhD, looking at how we can transform our trauma. Because the stats say pre-2020, 67% of adults in Australia had experienced at least one distressing event. That was pre-2020. I think if we were going to be really honest, we're looking at least 100%, but most of us, or some of us, don't even know, because once again, I think we sometimes partake in the oppression Olympics of whose trauma is bigger than the other. My invitation is to say, maybe you could just stop and pause and see what story from any trauma event is still actually driving the decisions you make, either in your personal or your business life. I believe it's linked to our creativity, and I'll come onto that in a second. So what happened when I started to get really curious and rebelliously curious? And I want to break down what my definition of being rebelliously curious is. Firstly, is to go back to that young version of yourself where you can ask questions with no fear of retribution. The rebelliousness tends to throw some people off because we still have a meaning attached to rebelliousness that suggests you are against any and everything just for the sake of it. To rebel for me is for you to actually go against status quo, especially if it's no longer serving. If you are here, you're here for a reason, whether you got coerced or guided or, you came, there is something you are already curious about. If you have not got to whatever point it is you are trying to get to, I'm inviting you to get just a little bit rebellious on the way in which you've been doing it. And I know the next thing you will say is how, and I'll share that shortly. But for me, I really had to challenge it. I think I still sound like I'm from South London, but I know when I go back home, a lot of my family think I've got an Australian accent. That is rebellious. They did not think or even believe I would last longer than a year, especially because they knew I would struggle to find places that could deal with my hair and my afro. They did not think that I would survive it, but that was part of being rebellious. It's actually being rebellious against what I think is possible. The minute you find yourself using the vocabulary, I will never, which is where judgment comes from, I will never do X, Y, Z, for me is the minute you start to limit what you are able to do. So when I started getting really rebellious, my relationships changed. I'm missing my son's final soccer game today. He did a hat trick. I got the text message before. I do suffer from the mum guilt, but what I have done in being rebelliously curious about my relationship as a single mum is to make sure I have my own charter and agreement with them. I think Fiona mentioned this notion of trying to see what other people are doing. I have my own. I know it doesn't fit the memo. I know it doesn't fit the 2.4 white picket fence household, but I have to be comfortable in it. And sometimes there's a period that I've been invited to go on an event that might take me out for a couple of weeks or months. That means I'm not with my children. But when I go back to why I'm doing what I'm doing, I know I need to be rebelliously curious about what I think being a good mum or parent is. Similarly, I have a great relationship with the father of my son, who is in the Angry Bird Top. He lives in Arizona. And the story I like to tell that really was rebellious was in 2020, when we started to close our borders, my son's father said, can Levi come and live with me in America? Whew, that completely threw me off. My whole identity had been triggered. Because here I was as the dominant carer at that point for 6 years. He was asking if he could go and live there. Now, I talk about a more just, equitable, diverse, and inclusive world. And I knew that if I couldn't even tap into a narrative that would suggest my son could go and live with his father, means I'm not really living it to be true. For 24 months, my son was away from me with his dad in Arizona. And it was hard, but it was necessary. It was necessary partly because I had to get rebellious about the story I told myself that I needed to be the only or dominant carer. And I've still been able to go on and have relationships and now currently engaged. And I say that because part of the trauma attached to my story as a child was my inability to form relationships. Now, I've just put relationships there that are quite personal. For you, it could be relationships with your work colleagues. Most importantly, relationships with people that you tend to struggle to connect with. And I'll talk more on that a bit later. spoke about this. I've had a gym, and I genuinely don't say this to impress you, but impress upon you whatever it is, whether it's expanding your business, whether it's actually making it smaller, because I've actually sold 2 of those 3 businesses. Well, actually one, the cafe, that was a stupid-ass mistake I did in 2020. I usually put this up there because I have no issue now with failing. For me, I used to think that when I failed, it meant I was a failure. It actually just means that I know a little bit about something and things to do and not to do. But opening different businesses has been a way for me to expand my creativity. But these are things I never believe I could have done before. Wrote my first book. I believe every single one of you have a story in you, regardless. If you have been thinking about it but haven't done it, I would say check in. Not suggesting it's part of your business, but people do say if we are not sharing part of experiences that we have, that sometimes we're not giving as much. So I really want to feel there's someone in here who might be thinking about writing a book. The minute I started to get really curious about what was possible, especially what other people thought was possible of me, was when I started to get a lot more creative, a lot more innovative, and do other things, and be invited to stand and speak on stage or to do a TEDx talk. I get really passionate about, yes, there's a big part on the trauma transformation, but actually, can we start asking really, really good questions about why we do the things we do, or why certain things keep on showing up? Or if you want something and it hasn't happened yet, whether a change in your business, what is another question you can ask? And so I want to share, I guess my engineering brain says, a framework on how to ignite your rebellious curiosity. I'm going to start with find your spark. Reset it today, and I'm not sure my memory will allow me to go back in, but she kind of said it a different way. And for me, finding your spark is kind of finding your superpower. I believe most of us that find ourselves in some sort of rut, it's because I actually still think there's a distressing event that has either happened at some point that is driving your story today. I almost feel I could bet anywhere from $100 to $100,000 that problem you're trying to solve, part of the creativity has been dimmed because of an event that has happened in the past that you may or may not know is linked. Finding your spark means you need to kind of create the space, silence the noise, and I kid you not, I don't believe we actually checked our content with each other, but silence the noise that you hear. I know you are here at this conference, and I've done a lot of learning from Tony Robbins, and one thing that he says that always sticks with me is that you've probably come to this conference thinking this is what you want, but you end up leaving with what you need. And so my invitation to you is to keep emptying your cup, even though you may have had some thoughts and judgments on some of the speakers, is to just maybe sit with whatever discomfort you're having and figure out the messages for you, by you. People will be able to give you some insight, but most of the time we can't do that when we are still overshadowed with some events that have happened in the past. You know, when I sold my gym is actually in the UK. One of the things that was rebellious was the fact that I was opening a business in a different part of the world. And I remember thinking, who's this single parent trying to create a business? And I'm really big on modeling. And, you know, I love Richard Branson and how he's been able to open industries that he wasn't even, you know, kind of versed across. But I opened up my gym in the UK, and then I sold it in 2020. I had conflict with who my business partner was. I opened it on my own, but in selling it, he was to pay me over a set period of time. And what happened is he decided he wanted to remove me as the director because I had made the decision to give all the shares in good faith. I share all of that to say that that really shook me up. That was traumatized. And I know most of the time we just think of trauma to do with personal, but it also is to do with business. Sometimes family business, especially where some people have actually had it handed down to them from family. I had to look at that because what I started to do was tell myself a story that I would never go into partnership with anyone from one event. And I'll talk a bit more about how we tend to make a decision on many things in our life based off of one event, which isn't actually a full picture of reality. To find your spark will mean you need to go back and look at the distressing events you haven't looked at, but it's still defining your narrative on how you solve problems. Being innovative. People might say, how can I be more, innovative in the work I do? How can I be more creative? I want to introduce the concept of liminal thinking. And liminal thinking, some people have heard of it, but a lot haven't. The best way I describe liminal thinking is stretching yourself beyond even what you think is possible. It does mean you need to sit with discomfort slightly longer. And the best way I can talk about this is talking about, well, one way is the pyramid of belief. You probably have a set of beliefs that rides a lot of the things you do. I have no doubt you are experts at what you do. But if you haven't got to where you want to, or whatever it is you're trying to achieve, or the opportunity you're trying to bring in, then my invitation is you probably want to stretch yourself in a different way by challenging your beliefs. And I'll show you one way in which some of our beliefs are actually created. This usually takes me half an hour to an hour, and I promise I'm not going to do that. I won't go over time. So I am going to go through it quite quickly, so I really need you to pick up what you need from this. This is reality. Reality is everything that is happening now in this moment. There are things happening in the main arena. There are things happening in a different part of the Gold Coast, Australia, and the world at large. What is happening in this moment is reality. If we can suppress our egos for a second, we do not know every bit of reality. Reality is the unknowable, but your experience of that. So as I said, every single one of us has a book in us, and you all have experiences, personal, business, whatever aspect. You have your own version of experiences. But for some of us, we actually think that is reality. To go even further, and this is another overlap with some of Fiona's content, is where you focus your attention. Now, with your business, you've probably been focusing your attention on certain things, either certain problems, certain opportunities. So even though you have all this experience and wisdom and knowledge, your attention is what is actually driving a lot of your decisions. Now, I do not want to right or wrong any of it, but actually give you an awareness of how you're actually building some of the beliefs that are driving your business. And I want to invite you to maybe look at the other things you can't see to maybe give you more creativity to get where you want. Because where you focus your attention means there's a possibility you're actually missing so many other things. From that attention, you have theories. And from those theories, you have judgments. I'll give a very weird example, but I remember moving to Australia 9 years ago, not a big drinker, and I wanted a bottle of wine. And I'm used to seeing Sainsbury's and Tesco's, but you had Woolies here and Coles, and I just wanted a bottle of wine, and I go in, and they say, no, we don't sell wine here, you've got to go to the bottle-o. I was pissed, I was livid that I had to leave the store. And I say that because I've been kind of spoiled and had a theory that I should be able to go into any supermarket and buy whatever the hell I want without having to go anywhere else. And it eventually became a judgment because I'd call my family up and say, Australia's a little bit backwards because they make you go somewhere else to do X, Y, Z. These were stories I was sharing, but they became judgments based on what reality is for me. Sometimes there's a risk we sit in our own echo chamber. Some of the problems and challenges you have, are you in an echo chamber? Because what happens from the judgments you have on, well, this never happens, people do this, X, Y, Z, we start to create beliefs. But what compounds those beliefs are your obvious crowd. Once again, not making this shit up, but I remember Reese said it might have been Ryan. The people you surround yourself, not to say there's anything wrong with it, but if they've had similar experiences to you, they are either finding the same problems or not tapping into the creative forces that could allow you to solve it. And so my invitation to you is to actually find a different obvious crowd. Your creativity will come from actually listening to people who think radically differently to you, especially the ones you judge. You know, when people ask me, do I get nervous when I come up on stage? I do, but for different reasons now. You know, I have a half-decent voice. You know, I got to the penultimate version of The Voice Australia, and very nervous every single time. You know why I'm nervous? I'm nervous because when I've watched Australian Idol, I have judged the hell out of everybody on that stage. I'm giving all sorts of advice from my living room couch. So what happens is when I go up there, I think there's going to be a judgy version of Yemi in the audience. And so I've had to change my whole approach. For me, understanding the pyramid of belief has been powerful in solving some of my problems, understanding why I might have a client, or in your case, it could be a business partner or a tenant. why they act a certain way. This isn't just about me understanding myself, but actually understanding those I actually work with. What experiences have they had? If you want to get creative, my invitation is either change your experiences, do the thing that makes you scared but doesn't, challenge your safety, but really do that because it will open up the unknowable, which you actually think is reality. I'll finish off this last one, which is to stay curious. Go back to that younger version of yourself. If there's any wounds attached to it, heal it for asking questions. Ask questions. But ask high-quality questions and get radically honest with yourself. If you can't be honest with anybody else, be honest with yourself. If I was to just get a minute with each of you for 2 minutes and ask you why things are a certain way or why things haven't gone a certain way, and you were to be really honest with yourself, you would have the answer. Cut the shit. You would have the answer. And the minute you get that, you will be able to get creative on solving it. I know, for instance, I do not like flying. And I've created many stories as to why I don't like flying, but the truth is, I don't like flying because I'm not the one flying the plane. I like to be in control of who is carrying my machinery around, and that's the honest truth. And I know that might seem silly, but it's a big part. And so I know there's an element of trust that I have to have, because even when I'm in my Uber, I'm trying to make sure they're doing the speed limit. So it doesn't have to be all deep and sentimental, but get radically honest about why you have the challenges you have, or you're seeking opportunities or haven't taken out that opportunity. I'll finish off with this. Most of the time we are waiting for somebody else to come up with a solution. And the one thing that empowered me the most, and like I said, gave me the audacity to do some of the things I do, which is now making documentaries on how we can transform our trauma, but then still working with engineering organizations and people to get whatever results they have, is truly that I am the one I've been looking for. And I want to put that to you as well. It's not necessarily intent to be a mic drop moment, but if you ever find yourself looking outwards for who's going to solve some of those issues, it's going to start with yourself. So on that note, I want to thank you for holding the space and letting me use my potty mouth every now and again. Thank you.